everybody to Harvesting Hope, the virtual summit. I have a really special guest for you today, Christine Lewis, and I'm so excited. She's from Spoken Word Yoga, spiritually significant yoga, but really we know yoga is about life. It's really about a spiritually significant life. And she is going to wow you in today's interview. Christine, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, Hope, thank you so much for having me. It's such a blessing to be a part of it. I know that this is life-changing for so many people on so many levels, so I'm glad to be able to contribute.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Well, I'm going to just kick it off right away. Tell the listeners who you are, what you do, who do you work for, what's your jive?
Well, I created this yoga practice, spoken word yoga. I infuse spiritually significant life coaching, positive affirmations into the yoga practice. So very often when people start a yoga practice, they are physically confronted by the practice. And inevitably, people create this mind chatter, this conversation that's usually rooted in a comparison or an evaluation or an analysis or an examination of the feelings they're feeling in their body, the sensations as they move through the practice. And most people's default response is a negative criticism. It's usually a judgment or something that ultimately is breaking them down. And I try to shift that for people to get them to automatically start to perceive the sensations, the circumstances as something positive. So understanding that there are no obstacles, there are only opportunities, getting rid of the idea that there's something we can't do, and understanding that everything is limitless, that the infinite is surrounding us in everything, and we're stepping into infinite possibilities with everything we're doing. So whether it's stepping forward into a lunge, whether it's working into a hip stretch or a hamstring stretch, the idea that that time we spend on a yoga mat is actually mind training for the way we deal with circumstances in life. So if you feel like your hamstring is tight, what are you going to do? Are you going to tell yourself you have a bad hamstring and beat it up? Well, chances are it gets worse that way. So if we think about being able to shift our perspective that the sensations are actually the indication that we're creating change, that we're evolving, that we're moving, because change is very rarely convenient. So when we're in the midst of the change, if we can interpret it as something that's actually working for us instead of against it, and understanding that there's not all that much struggle in life. The struggle really is the strength. And in the midst of what we think is confrontation, what we think is catastrophe even, are ultimately those times that are really pushing us into our greatness. And that's where we learn the most significant and profound lessons. So I like to weave positive affirmations and just a way to shift people's perception of what they're feeling, and knowing that that translates off the mat, so that, you know, instead of sitting in traffic waiting for the light to change and being very, you know, agitated about the fact that you're stuck in one spot, instead of waiting for the light to change, using that time to change your life, making every moment significant. So we don't feel bored. We don't feel like time is wasted. We're not standing in line waiting for things to change. We're actively changing our life because we have the power to do that in our minds. And if you can do it on the mat, you can do it in your life.
Awesome. I love it. I always look at like the yoga mat for our incubator for our everyday life. It's like practice here and then go global, you know, go bigger. But I'm curious, is this how you found yoga, or what led you to this type of mindset and this way of approaching yoga? Because I'm sure it didn't just like poof, you know, I'm going to be this way right from the start. Like, where'd this all start?
It's funny because I was very lucky to have a mother who was very heavily rooted in a feminist perspective. She went to Woodstock. She was very much in this authentic energy way of living. And it's funny because my grandmother, my mom's mom, who is 99 years old when she passed away last year, everything that goes on in life, she put a positive spin on it. It did not matter what was going on in the world. She created at least her perception of it so that everything was fabulous, amazing, and spectacular all the time. So I started to realize that, you know, especially, you know, you see somebody at the age of 99 who is able to perceive life as this just inherent blessing, and everything that's happening, it doesn't matter whether there's struggle or whether you're uncomfortable, that everything is getting you somewhere, guiding you to a place. And it's funny because I started off as a geologist. I was specialized in sedimentology. I did research around the world, and I always traveled around the globe. And even I noticed, especially the times where I did not speak the local language, that fundamentally the energy it requires no translation. You can look someone in the eye, you can feel the way they feel, you can exchange just body language, and people understand how you feel. And then you notice that everyone wants the same thing. Everyone wants just happiness, connection, community, love. And the irony is we often talk ourselves out of that connection. Like, how often do you make eye contact with somebody and divert your attention away so that you don't really absorb that connection? People almost, feel uncomfortable with a deep connection with each other, even though that's what we're craving and searching for. So when I noticed the same energy around the world, and I realized, well, there are people in so many different circumstances, people that live, below the poverty line, but yet are able to have this quality of life, this appreciation for connection, this inherent joy just in speaking and engaging. And, and then I come back to the US often and I see that, sometimes that's not always the case. People feel sometimes this aggression, and I'm thinking, well, where does that come from? And ultimately we know that anything that is not serving us, anything's working against us, is really rooted in fear fundamentally. So if we can shift our foundation from fear that isolates us, that separates us, that disconnects us, into this just unconditional love, and this space where we're all accepting, we're not judging. And especially that starts with ourselves, because our self-confidence, our self-awareness, our sense of our purpose is really rooted in our ability to lead with this open heart and open mind and open space. Well, and then, you start realizing, well, how do I create that for myself? Because we all walk through life and we're tempted to criticize, we're tempted to judge, we're tempted to compare, we're tempted to feel like things are working against us, that people are working against us. And all of us, I think, fall victim to that victim mentality. And then you realize, well, who's creating that for us? And then in the process of meditation and sitting in silence, you realize, well, I'm the only one in here. And if I'm the only one in here and I'm listening to myself think, well, who's doing the listening?
That's so powerful.
How do we get to that spot where we're really more in tune and connected with ourselves, so the external circumstances are not happening to us? We're co-creators. Everything is happening with us. And then I started, especially through meditation and visualization, I started to just play with my mind. I grew up as an only child. Luckily, I grew up with my best friends, so I never really had that only child experience, but I certainly spent a lot of time playing with my imagination and understanding then that, when we fall asleep at night at dream, we create a different dimension. We create an alternate reality. And we are entirely convinced that that reality, when we're dreaming, is all that exists. So I think to myself, well, if we can do that when we're dreaming, why not make the attempt to do that in the conscious state, so that we can kind of explore the dimensions, the how much power our mind has in creating a vision and creating a feeling. And then knowing that everything we want ultimately is rooted in a feeling. People always think they want a thing or want something, but it's really the feeling we think that thing is going to bring us. That's what we want. So then my thought is, well, why not bypass the thing altogether and just go straight for the feeling? And if we can manufacture it, we can create it. And maybe that starts with just repeating it to ourselves over and over again as a mantra. Maybe it just starts with the belief system. Maybe it just starts with, these affirmations that can help us create a mindset, because we're training ourselves, right? I mean, it's like this Olympic run that we're going on in our minds. And this is our work, is to put our minds to work for us in the most functional and productive way, so that we actually are giving ourselves access to life.
I love that.
I think the mind work, it's the yoga practice. I always joke, we get them in for the physical, we get them in for a little sweat and a little stretch, and yeah, you're going to be able to balance on one foot or stand on your head.
Trapped them in somehow.
That's the thing. But nobody cares if you can stand on your head. Nobody cares if you can balance on one foot. People care the way you make them feel. And it starts with how we feel in our alone time, sitting with ourselves. I joke with people often, especially those who are struggling with meditation. I say, if you find it challenging to sit alone with yourself in silence, you can imagine how other people feel spending time alone with you. That that, if there's a sense that you're not comfortable with yourself, how would you expect anyone else to feel comfortable with you? So
True.
and we spend more time with ourselves in this life than we're going to spend with anyone else. We really ought to have a productive, positive relationship with ourselves. So even if we can just start by flipping the switch and shifting the perspective so that we're not just stuck in this victim role, that we really are putting our thoughts to work for us and just being able to shift our perception of our circumstances to make life a little more enjoyable, if nothing else. I mean, just for the fun of it.
I agree. And I think part of what you're saying too is it's like, okay, you've created the reality that you're in. It might be a negative mindset. You created that. So that also means that you can create a positive one. Like you just didn't poof get here one day. This has been an accumulation of you feeding into whatever it is over time, which means that you can change that. And I think that's so powerful for people to hear, because you touched on it a little bit, is the victim mentality. And I always tread lightly when I use that, because nowadays it's like, you got to be careful with that. But
Oh,
I
yeah.
think what we're trying to say is you have to stop giving yourself excuses as to why you don't deserve a better life. You don't deserve happiness, and step up to the plate to realize that there are things that you can change that cost $0. That
Exactly.
costs $0, and that takes very little effort to smile at someone or to smile at yourself in the mirror and say, wow,
Yeah.
I'm pretty amazing. I am
Yeah.
pretty amazing. I may not have rocked headstand today, but I actually managed to stand on my own 2 feet without falling over. That's pretty good.
Which is an accomplishment for most of us every day.
So I'm curious, has there been a point in your life where you really struggled, or that you were faced with conflict or controversy, and how did you handle that, or how did you overcome that? Like, was there a shift for you, or a time in your life where you're like, wow, and you did something different?
It was definitely in my transition from being a geologist into a yoga teacher, which, you know, the irony is, you know, geology, we're looking at how the earth evolves over time. Yoga, we're thinking about how the physical, emotional, and spiritual is evolving over time. So it really is not as far removed as it might appear.
No.
But working as a geologist, I mean, I'm a woman of color in a science that's predominated by older men who are not very welcoming to young minds coming in that are not in alignment with what their fraternity, for lack of a better word, has been comfortable with. And I noticed that as much as you had to really assert yourself and make a stance and make sure, you know, make every effort to make sure that the work you were putting out and the research you were doing was above and beyond, so that you would be accepted at this table, that where people would really listen to what you were saying and realize that there was some validity and value to it. And when I started teaching yoga, the irony is that what was based on tangible research in geology, I could show you numbers, I can show you data. In yoga, you see that people come in, especially in the beginning of a yoga class. You look around and you see people are in a frenzy. They've come out of traffic. Their energy and the vibration is so different from the energy that you see after the practice. And you notice that, you know, within an hour and 90 minutes time on a yoga mat, people are shifting the way they think, feel, and behave. And that, although there's not quantifiable data to back that up, the spiritual currency and the energy of it was so rewarding for me that I kept thinking, well, you know, how can I inspire this in more people? What can I do to help people in this shift? Because it made such a difference in my own life, in the way that I felt about my power, my strength, my purpose. And thinking that, well, you know, if I'm able to tap into this for myself, if I'm able to inspire this in a room full of 30, 50 people, how could I project this out on a more global scale? So that's when I started spoken word yoga, really was when like the big shift started happening, because I realized that just these simple gems of wisdom, seeds of idea, things that you can plant in the lives of people, you have the power. We all have the power to change the lives of every single person we touch. So I set the intention that I wanted 1 billion people around the world to have access to yoga and meditation. Me being the technologically inept individual that I am, I'm trying not to claim that, I'm moving out of it and evolving, but my technological skills never were able to create a vision of how that would happen. So I started journaling, setting intentions, and about a year after I set the intention for 1 billion people to have access to yoga, I had a gentleman come into a class in Vegas that I was teaching, introduced me to someone in LA who was working on this, had a global text messaging service, was working on creating virtual reality technology to help people with visualizations and affirmations. And it was literally everything that I would need to start the ball in motion to reach 1 billion people around the world. Me, who, you know, only started text messaging like 5 years ago and was resistant to get on Facebook and Instagram because I just didn't want to be consumed by the machine, to have that come into my space with a simple intention. And all of my life, I've noticed, you know, I've always been very, especially in academia, it's very easy to set a goal and say, oh, you know, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, I'm going to do this. But with regard to your energy and your evolution and thinking about really what your purpose is here in this life, it's not as easy to really project into the tangible physical of what your intention is. So I want to change the world. Well, how do you go about doing that? That's where the disconnect in the spiritual world is. You know, it's easy to say, I need to get a degree and do this, that, the next thing. But in the spiritual sense, how do you go about that? What's the work in changing it? So when the global text messaging service came into my space, I started recording positive affirmations and realizing that 1 to 2 minutes in the morning has the power to change the way people feel about their entire day. And I would get feedback from people saying that, you know, they would repeat what I said in their minds throughout the day. And that these simple words, simple shifts, they change our energy. And so I wake up in the morning and I have a mantra that I repeat to myself about, you know, infinite wealth and infinite happiness and infinite abundance and infinite love and infinite connection and all of these things happening in a space where I'm inviting in what I want. And it immediately changes my state of being. So I just started to play with my mind and realize I can talk myself into a feeling. And that's a power. And so to be able to access the power of the mind and understand that you can either obviously put your mind to work for you or against you. And I just didn't want to live a life where I was in this battle with myself. And I understood early on that, you know, we have a lot of tools that are inherent within each of us that I think so much of our focus on the material world, on the physical space, actually prevents us from tapping into. So we're almost robbing ourselves of the tools that we inherently have to change our lives and make the quality of life better. And so it was just that awareness that, you know, our mind is the most powerful thing that we can use. And the more that you can inspire positive change in yourself and then inspire that in the people you touch, we create a community that shifts and it turns into a global community. And that ripple effect of energy, it keeps going and it changes the way we connect with everyone around us in the world. And I just felt like that was such a more powerful way to invest my energy and time in this life than just pumping out a couple lab reports about the poor water quality and things going on in the environment that are a little overwhelming. But
I love it.
Shift in energy is easy to see in people as they walk in and out of the room. So
well, and what you're saying too is so simple but so complex, because what you're saying is like, yeah, you can change your mind. You can change your mind. And as someone that has worked through a life strangling eating disorder, like I get that. Like I always said, I had two minds. I had my eating disorder mind and then my sane mind. And it was like this battle and realizing that like, okay, I have to recognize that. And then I have to choose to get involved, to not choose that thing anymore, to not choose that mindset. And like what you're saying over and over again is you have to make that choice to choose to be happy, to choose to see the good, and to make those choices that are hard, but realize where you want to put your energy at the end of the day. Is it really impacting yourself, the immediate and the global? And what a huge shift, but what is such a profound result or experience because of that. And this kind of leads me into my next question is I believe in small little bite-sized changes in life or snacks or steps can lead you towards longer lasting results. And how many of us do I'm going to do 5 days a week at the gym. I'm going to cut out all crappy food. I'm going to like only think positive. I'm never going to watch TV ever again a day in my life. And then they do it for like 5 days and then they fall off the face of the earth and say they can't do it. So I'm curious if you believe that, small steps do definitely lead to permanent changes. What are some small steps you could suggest to listeners that they could take to kind of follow your philosophy?
Just to focus on the feeling. I mean, I always say it doesn't matter what you think you want in the world, it always comes down to the feeling. And if you can even define your dreams, define your goals as a feeling, how do you want to feel when you get there? Then focus on that feeling and repeat it to yourself constantly. Anytime, because I catch myself all the time, whether, getting negative, feeling, discouraged, little wave of
Because you're human.
depression, because and frankly, this is the world we live in. There's so many things going on. You can walk out your door and be faced with anything. It's how are you going to handle it? Yeah. How are you going to handle it? What are you going to create for yourself? Are you going to fall victim to what's going on out there, or are you going to stand in the space of strength, of the possibility of what we can create inside? So I try to be an objective observer of my thoughts. So I notice, and the fact, we realize we can listen to our thoughts, we're paying attention to our thoughts. And so that puts us in the driver's seat to be able to shift those thoughts. So once you notice that your mind is taking you in a place that you don't want to go, once you notice if you've said something that is not authentic to the way you want to feel or you want to make others feel, to be present in the moment, in the breath, in the space of now, and then be able to correct that. Because what happened in the last breath, this is also the perfect reminder, is the inhale and the exhale. You inhale, and at some point, if you were to hold on to that inhale for too long, you get desperate to let it go. And then you let it go, and you let go of that breath and you don't have it in, you're desperate for the next breath. And it's the awareness that letting go is the only possible way to invite in something new. And then to be cognizant and conscious of what we're inviting in. Whatever happened in the last moment, we have the ability right now to replace it with something entirely different. We have a clean slate in every breath. This breath is the first breath of the rest of our lives. Everything that has happened before this moment has prepared us to create what we want right now. And that gives you this space of power. So it doesn't matter really whatever is happening in the external space. If you can approach it with the idea that this is an opportunity for me to expand the idea of what's possible, to expand an awareness that I'm not confined to a physical circumstance. I'm not confined to a feeling. I have the option right now to shift it. And there's not really a big jump. It's just a shift in perspective from agony to ecstasy, from happiness, getting out of that space of complacency, getting into a space where we're using every thought to work for us. So in the moments that you recognize that something isn't right, something's negative, something's critical, judgmental, immediately just being able to shift that. And even if you don't believe it, you can look happy and people will believe you're happy. Just fake a smile, and just that in of itself shifts the way we feel about things. Whatever the circumstance is, if you smile, it shifts things. And then I joke that, you can do a little woohoo or a little, like, just something. I mean, do it randomly, because
Let's do it right now.
woohoo,
Woohoo!
it changes everything. Like, you literally, like, the level of enthusiasm.
How can you be mad?
Exactly. And it's funny because if you do it in the most confrontational circumstances, the shift is that much more abrupt and that much more. I had one of my students said that she used it she was at a dinner party and it turned into a heated political discussion. And in the middle of it, she just woohoo and just jumped up and did and literally the entire energy of the room changed. And at first people thought she was a little nuts. But when you really think about it as an objective observer, who's more nuts? The person who's getting into this heated, aggressive discussion, or the person who just jumps up and woohoo and celebrates their life a little more? So, it's thinking about our moments, knowing our moments are turning into memories, knowing that we're investing our energy in whatever we're doing now. And we want a return on that investment. We would not invest our money somewhere we know it's going down a black hole and we're never getting it back. we don't want to invest our energy down a black hole where it's dragging us into depression or dragging us into this space that's not productive. We have to maintain this awareness of our light, of our energy, of our power, and just have the intention that we're going to make the effort to allow our light to shine, to make the world a brighter place. And it starts with, you know, what we create for ourselves. So creating one word, one feeling, one idea that you repeat to yourself over and over again, that kind of pulls you out of wherever you were and then gives you a blank slate in this breath to create something brand new.
That in itself is just a great little process for people. Like if they could apply or change something, can you say that again, what you had said, like what to change or apply?
Think about the feeling. Focus on how you want to feel. When everything is exactly how you've always dreamed it to be, focus on the feeling and then repeat that feeling. The word has power. It has energy. We know that words change the molecular structure of water. We know that we're comprised of water. If we can start to use one word, one phrase, one idea that puts us into the state of being, the feeling that we want to feel, and remind ourselves of that constantly. And I use it as a test for myself when I'm sitting in traffic, when I'm standing in line, when I'm doing something that I probably don't want to really be doing. I use that as an opportunity to go on a little journey, and I create a little laboratory in my mind, and I start focusing on creating a visual that's rooted in the feeling that I want. And the power of that, you can literally take yourself into a different space and time, and not to wait until we fall asleep at night to dream, but to start doing it actively, consciously, and in the present moment, and letting your mind drift and work for you. So that whether you're in a confrontational hip stretch, hamstring stretch, whether you're sitting in traffic, whether you're whatever it is that is maybe not the ideal vision of the physical circumstance you want to be in, give yourself the ideal consciousness, the ideal vision, the energy that you want to create and take with you. And just know that we have the ability to shift our perception of anything and everything. And why not just play with that? You know, especially when you don't have anything else to do, just start to play in your mind and give yourself that free space to just start creating a visual. You know,
It's better
visualize.
rabbit hole to go down than the other one, the negative
Yeah.
Nelly.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of curious, what is your daily routine like? Like, what are some of the things that you do during the day to keep yourself happy and focused and kind of stay with this lifestyle choice that you've really embedded in yourself on and off the mat?
Two things I think life-changing: the mantra, the positive affirmation in the morning, waking up with how you want to feel, going to sleep with how you want to feel, using that to start and end your day. And journaling is huge. It's the conversation with ourselves, writing an outline. I mean, I love to do this during the new year, but I do it throughout the year. I have my journal, and I like to journal daily, but then what I'll do is I'll flip to the back pages of the journal, and I'll create an outline for business, for personal relationships, for physical space, for whatever my goals are in that space and time. And I outline it, and I leave a couple lines of space in between the two so I can go in and keep filling things in. So I make sure that I have, and the outline is again rooted in a feeling, rooted in energy. I know the impact, I know how I want to make others feel, and I know how I want to feel. So I use that for each area of my life. And then at the end, there's this outline that I can go back and refer to when I get a little lost or
Could you
distracted.
give a feeling example? Like, what would be a feeling that you would have as a root for that outline?
So feeling happiness is very easy. Everybody wants to be happy. Well, how do you find happiness? What defines your happiness? Well, happiness for me is the ability to know that what I'm doing on a daily basis is changing the lives of the people I touch, whether it's going to the grocery store and saying something pleasant to the cashier, whether it's noticing that there's someone who's in pain and giving them a hug, whether it's just simple things to be able to know that I'm impacting people in a way that's going to leave a legacy behind that's more powerful than whatever I might accumulate in the physical space. So the energy, the way people think of you when they leave you. So I make the effort. One of the easy ways for that happiness is to make certain that every interaction I have, especially with strangers, and even especially with people that I might not like very much, I make even more of an effort there, because I feel like our our words, our thoughts about people, they're more a reflection of us than they are of the person we're
Agreed.
thinking about. So if we can consistently come from a space of love, consistently come from a compassionate space where we're giving an offering of our energy that makes people feel better after spending time with us. So that's one of my gauges for happiness. So I'll use that, I'll set an intention for the day to make certain that every person I meet, everything that I do, I lead with a smile. I make the effort to give blessings. You know, somebody curses at me on the street or the highway, you know, I send them blessings. And it's, people laugh and be like, well, you know, it's a funny way to respond to things sometimes. And the irony is the people who are most upset or angry or unhappy, you give them blessings and it throws them completely off. They're
Yes.
not sure
It's
how to
hard to be
process
angry at someone that's being nice to you.
that. And that's the idea. So my little strategy for happiness in that way is to invest to make other people happy. And the funny thing is when you do that, you automatically change the way you feel about yourself and your energy. So little strategies, the just giving a kind word, making an effort to always give a compliment and never a criticism. Especially in our minds, we can look at people and impose a criticism on them. Whether or not you ever say it to them, your energy is being affected by that. Our energy is being affected by that. So whether or not we communicate it to the person, it's just our state of being and thinking is affecting every cell and fiber of our body. So if we can be consistent in that offering of energy, knowing we're leaving a legacy of energy behind, that's one of the easy access to happiness.
Okay.
Another thing that I like to do, I make sure that I try to shift my perspective of challenges, because I've noticed just through my life, it seems to me that the people who have made a phenomenal uh, phenomenal progress in what they wanted to do often experienced some major trauma, some major catastrophe, and it was after that they were motivated or inspired to change and do something different. Well, I don't want to wait for trauma or catastrophe to be inspired to change. I don't want to wait until I feel uncomfortable to be inspired to change. So I try to just stay on this steady track of, well, how can I keep shifting my mind? What do I need to say? Whether it's just using the word happy, joy, love, just repeating happiness, joy, and love over and over again. It sounds so simple, so trivial, and it
Because
is.
it is.
But it changes the way you feel. It changes the way you think about yourself and the way you approach the world. So word power, to me, the power of our thoughts is the biggest thing. And if we can just start on that small scale of just changing our thinking and our mindset and our idea of our own access to happiness, that the circumstances don't need to change at all. One of the other things that really resonated with me a lot is I was in a meditation course, and there was a young girl who had stood up, who had gone through horrible things in her life, experienced all sorts of trauma. And she says, she stood up and she was saying that at some points when she was experiencing the most extreme abuse, she would think of Nelson Mandela sitting in a jail cell for 30 years and how when he was released, how he said he never felt like he was in prison. And in fact, he felt sorry for the prison guards because they would come in and out and they were very aware that they were imprisoned. But in his mind, he never felt that way. And you think about people in all walks of life, in all circumstances, living around the globe in whatever physical circumstance they're in, that if we have the power to keep our internal world in a space that is at least delusionally happy, because it's better than realistic misery. And that space of delusional happiness, as crazy as it may sound, I honestly believe that ultimately that's the access to our bliss. That's the
You'll eventually start living that way. You'll eventually start
Exactly.
believing that delusional bliss, and it'll feel like, why would I ever want to feel that other way ever again? Whether this
Yeah.
is real or not, you eventually make it real.
Yeah. And even being in the space, we all get these waves of emotions that push us, into wherever it is, whether it's wanting to cry or laugh or feel but you realize that these are all just waves, the energy is coming and going. We have the same ability to shift what's coming at us by shifting what we're creating within us. And I think the more that each of us individually contribute to the collective consciousness, the more each of us individually, shift the way that we think about ourselves and our impact on the world, this is how we change the world. It's one person at a time, one idea at a time, one action at a time. That's all it ever takes to change anything. And, each of us are standing in a space of power right now to be able to change the course and direction of our lives. And it starts in this breath, with this thought, in this moment, and just harnessing that power is the most valuable thing we could ever do for ourselves.
It's fantastic. You pretty much already answered, what does living the best life mean? That pretty much you've summed that up. But I'm curious. So you talk about mantra and you've talked about positive words. Do you have one that you use every day? Like, do you have a saying or a mantra, an affirmation that you use every day that's powerful for you? And if would you mind sharing?
Yeah. One of the things that I is rooted in love. I say, love in my life, love in the world, love in my life, love in the world, and realizing that, we're creating this space, this loving, everything is rooted in love. Everything we want is rooted in love.
Let's just say love.
Love. And love with a woohoo. I mean, there ought to be some enthusiasm with it.
Get excited.
Living life with enthusiasm, allowing yourself to get excited about even the most mundane things, because that level of enthusiasm is changing the way we feel in our experiences. One of my other favorite sayings is that our emotion is the only evidence we exist. That when we look back on life, we're not going to remember the physical space. We're not going to remember exactly where we were, but we will always remember the way we felt in that space. So if we know that our emotion is the only evidence of our existence, we want to make certain that we're assigning an emotion to this moment that's worth holding on to. Because when you look back on life, all you think about, all you reference are the feelings. You know how you felt when you spent time with someone. You know how you felt when you were in a specific place. We know that our emotion is inherently tied to everything we're doing, and we're creating that emotion. We're assigning an emotion to every circumstance. So we have the choice, between misery or ecstasy. We have the choice between thinking that things are working with us or against us. And in that choice, we have power and we have options. And frankly, between the option of agony or ecstasy, it should be an easy choice. So living that way, this space of being where we're really allowing our emotions to define our experiences, letting our emotions give value to everything that we're doing, because our energy is the most valuable currency that exists. It's what lasts longer than anything. And the love, that increases in value over time. Once you've felt love with someone, you will always hold that. You'll always have that space in your heart. You'll always have that sense of bond, that feeling of connection.
And that's what people go back to. They don't go back to the money. They don't go back to the fancy house. They go back to the feeling.
Yeah. And all that stuff, frankly, is just taking up space. And it's, I set the intention probably about 4 years ago. I'm not sure how happy everyone in my life is about this, but I set the intention, I'm not buying anyone any more stuff. I don't care what holiday it is, whatever. I want
agree.
Experience. We're going to spend quality time. So instead of purchasing something for someone, I'd rather spend the hour, 2 hours. Let's go to lunch. Let's walk on the beach. Let's go sit under a tree. Let's talk in whatever way that we need to
make a memory.
And make a memory together, because whatever I buy you today, you're not even remember what it was 10 years from now. It's going to be sitting on a shelf in a closet somewhere, if it's even lucky to be around for that long. But the memory stays with us. So really investing in our moments, investing in our connections, investing every ounce of our energy into what we're doing now, because this is where we get the return on the investment. It's like, putting money into your savings account and realizing you're getting 100% interest on everything you put in. You're receiving this money back. Well, why wouldn't you do that? Why not create and shift yourself into a space of delusional happiness, especially when you're not in it. And then the irony is, the first time you do it, you start to realize that you have the ability to do it always. And that, I think, people walk out of a lot of my yoga classes and say that, instead of thinking it's pain in their hip, they immediately shift it, because I tell them, I said, that's not pain, it's joy. That's happiness. Anytime you want to, replace it with joy, and, give yourself this space where you automatically shift your interpretation of everything, so it comes into a positive space. And if you can do that in a hip stretch, you can do it on a yoga mat, you can do it in every aspect of your life. And that's where the training starts to happen. It's the training, the consistency, the persistence of approaching everything with a positive perception. And that then winds up being your default reaction. And, we're habitual beings. Humans are habitual. We love consistently. We love a schedule. We like things to be regulated. Well, start to regulate your mind. Start to regulate your thoughts. Start to be consistent and persistent and focusing on the positive things. And inevitably, it winds up being effortless.
I love it. That was a great summary of this whole experience, this whole conversation just now. Any last thoughts? And also, where can people find out more about you?
Well, spoken word yoga on every platform, everywhere. I'm on Instagram and Facebook, and not tweeting yet, but I will at some point. I feel
like tweeting, you're either like in or you're out. Like, yeah, I tweet, but
yeah, and I'm kind of like, yeah, I'm definitely I'm dipping my toe into the technological pond, and it's coming along. I have, like I said, the global text messaging service. You can go on my website, spokenwordyoga.com, and subscribe and hear what I have to say every morning. Hopefully it's always profound. And then I lead yoga retreats around the world. So I take people to Thailand, Costa Rica, Tulum, Mexico, Peru, Machu Picchu. I try to choose spiritually significant places around the world, and places where, we can get in tune with not just the energy of the ancestors that were there before, but really trying to carry on a tradition of really positive energy that we wind up creating collectively together. And the takeaways certainly are just the ability to use our thoughts to work for us, and using your emotions to define your experiences, and making certain that you create an emotion that works for you. And even in those times of sadness, honoring that as an indication that, this is an opportunity to make an internal change, and that everything that ever happens in our lives starts with what we perceive in our minds. There is no room for anything to exist in the physical space unless it first exists in our minds and in our consciousness. So realizing that we're the origin, that we're the creators, we're the director of our dreams, the executive producers of our lives, that in that space of power, we stand in strength, we stand in constant opportunity and possibility to create something more than what's presented to us. And frankly, it's a little fun to take those circumstances that are really that are not what we want, that are not pleasant, and then turn it into something exciting. So that, when you're in a hip stretch that feels like, your body's working against you, to be able to shift that into an experience that feels like the most enjoyable ecstasy, the most pleasurable thing you've ever created. Once you tap into that power, you'll never let it go. And you'll share it with the people around you. You'll inspire it in your friends, lovers, children, relatives. You start to be the example of the energy you want to see in the world. And it just starts with a simple shift in perspective. So one thought at a time. That's the work. One thought at a time.
That is a perfect way to close. Christine, from the bottom of my heart, I am so blessed that you decided to be a part of this summit. I just think so much of what you talked about needs to be heard, and so many people are kind of maybe overcomplicating things. So thank you for just reminding people that they have joy, they have happiness, and it starts here. Yeah. It doesn't have to start with $1 million. It starts here. I think that's so powerful. And spoken word yoga, what you're doing is absolutely necessary in the yoga world too. I think that is such a need to get back to that place. So thank you, listeners. Thank you so much for tuning into this interview. I always believe that we hear the right things in the right moments of our lives just when we need to. So if you've tuned into this interview, it was meant for you today. And just remember that no matter how hard it gets, never lose hope. Never lose hope that there is more for you out there, that there is an opportunity for you to grow into your talents. And it's waiting for you to find it. And I hope that this inspires you to do that today. Thank you guys so much. And until next time, namaste.